The Miami Dolphins finally grabbed their first win of the season, but it came with heartbreak. Star wide receiver Tyreek Hill went down with a brutal injury, and unfortunately, he's out for the year. That's a crushing blow for this offense, but the Dolphins aren't sitting back. They've already made a move to strengthen the wide receiver room. Miami has brought back a familiar face, Cedric Wilson Jr. That's right. Wilson is officially returning to the 53-man roster after spending time on the Saints practice squad. With Hill sidelined, the Dolphins were down to just 5 active receivers, so this reunion with Wilson makes perfect sense. For those who remember, Cedric Wilson had a big career year with the Dallas Cowboys before joining Miami in 2022. The Dolphins signed him to a 3-year deal, expecting him to line up alongside Jalen Waddle as a key weapon. But when the blockbuster Tyreek Hill trade happened later that offseason, Wilson's role shifted to being more of a depth piece. Now, with Miami desperate for reinforcements, Wilson is back in the mix and ready for another shot in this offense. And that's not all. We also have to talk about Jason Sanders and a few players who could return from IR this week against the Panthers. Big roster decisions are on the horizon, and every move matters with the season still in its early stages. Cedric Wilson's time in Miami didn't go as planned the first time around. After the Dolphins restructured his deal, he hit free agency in 2023 and signed a 2-year contract with the New Orleans Saints. Things didn't stick there either. He was waived in August, then re-signed to the Saints practice squad. Now, at 29 years old, Wilson returns to Miami with something this offense desperately needs: size. At 6 feet 2 inches, he brings a physical presence to the wide receiver room that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle simply don't provide. He has the build to be a red zone threat, and that's exactly why Miami was intrigued by him when they first signed him a couple of years ago. Is he the perfect answer right now? Maybe not. Miami does have other big targets like Darren Waller and Nick Westbrook-Ikine, but adding another receiver with length and experience can only help. When it comes to free agency, Wilson was one of the better options left on the market. A trade could still be on the table, but as far as depth goes, this was a smart move. Looking back at his production, in his first season with Miami, Wilson was buried on the depth chart behind Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. He finished with just 12 catches for 136 yards, far from what fans expected. But in 2023, injuries to Hill and Waddle opened the door for Wilson to step up. He made the most of it, posting 22 receptions, nearly 300 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That showed flashes of what he can do when given opportunities. With the Saints, he never quite broke through, which led to his release. But now, with Miami thin at receiver, Wilson gets a second chance to prove he belongs. And this time, the Dolphins might need him more than ever. So here's the move. Miami officially adds Cedric Wilson Jr. to the active 53-man roster, stepping in to help replace Tyreek Hill for the rest of the season. If I had to describe this signing in one word, it would be familiarity. And honestly, that word has defined so much of the Mike McDaniel era in Miami. Ever since he became head coach in 2022, the Dolphins have leaned heavily on players who already know the system whenever depth is needed. Look at the running back position earlier this year. With Jalen Wright banged up and Alexander Mattison out for the season, Miami needed another back to pair with Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. Who did they call? Jeff Wilson Jr., a player McDaniel knew and trusted from his time in San Francisco. Now, with Tyreek Hill sidelined, the Dolphins do the same thing at wide receiver. Cedric Wilson Jr. has 2 years of experience in McDaniel's system, making him a natural fit to return. He'll likely slot in as the team's 6th receiver, but his familiarity with the offense could prove valuable if injuries pile up again. Here's how the depth chart shakes out. Jalen Waddle becomes the clear WR1. Behind him, Eric Ezukanma and Malik Washington step into bigger roles, while rookies like Taj Washington provide explosive upside. And don't forget Nick Westbrook-Ikine. At 6 feet 2 inches, he brings size, physicality, and blocking ability as Miami's big-bodied option on the outside. This is how the Dolphins operate. Next man up, but always with someone who knows the playbook inside and out. Familiarity isn't just a buzzword here, it's a strategy. If injuries were to hit again, Cedric Wilson Jr. would likely step into Nick Westbrook-Ikine's role. They're built similarly, and Wilson could mirror that big-bodied presence on the outside. So, the depth chart really sets up with 3 starters at the top, and then backups lined up behind each spot for insurance. What's interesting is how quickly this signing came together. Just hours before Wilson was re-added, head coach Mike McDaniel was asked if the Dolphins planned to bring in another wide receiver through free agency or a trade. His response: "We'll leave those conversations in the building between me and Chris Greer, but I feel confident in the guys we have." And then, not even 2 hours later, boom. Miami signs Cedric Wilson Jr. At the end of the day, this is about depth. Let's be real. The plan isn't for Wilson to see heavy snaps or suddenly become a major part of the offense. The Dolphins typically carry 5 active wide receivers on game day, and that won't change. Instead of Taj Washington being the odd man out each week, it'll likely be Wilson, unless an injury forces him into action. So what does this really mean? It means Miami is doubling down on familiarity. They're sticking with players who already know the system and can step in without hesitation. It's not a blockbuster move, but it's a smart insurance policy in case the depth chart takes another hit. Let's shift over to the injury front for Miami, because there are some important updates to watch. A couple of key players who started the season on injured reserve and the physically unable to perform list are now getting closer to returning. Head coach Mike McDaniel shared that both Jason Sanders and Liam Eichenberg are progressing well, but they won't be activated this Sunday against the Carolina Panthers. The good news is that they're eligible to return at any time, so a comeback in Week 6 against the Chargers is very much on the table. The Dolphins are being cautious here, and honestly, it's the smart play. The team has been holding strong despite those absences, and with Sanders, the kicking situation has been nearly perfect so far. There's no need to rush guys back when the season is still young. What matters is having them healthy and ready when the schedule gets tougher down the stretch. And make no mistake, when Miami gets these players back, the roster only gets stronger. Let's talk special teams for a moment, because Riley Patterson has been nothing short of phenomenal since stepping into the kicking job. Patterson began the year on the practice squad, but was elevated to the active roster in Week 4 after Jason Marshall Jr. went to IR. Since then, he's been perfect. 9 for 9 on extra points. 4 for 4 on field goals, hitting from 36, 40, 44, and nearly 48 yards. On Monday night against the Jets, he drilled both of his attempts without hesitation. Here's the bottom line. Jason Sanders is the more established kicker, no doubt. But would his presence have changed anything so far this season? Absolutely not. The Dolphins haven't missed a single kick with Patterson, and they haven't had to alter their play calling out of concern for their kicking game. For 4 weeks, everything has gone exactly as it would have with Sanders in the lineup. So if Miami wants to give Sanders another week to fully recover, that's perfectly fine. Patterson has proven he can be trusted. As for the offensive line, Andrew Meyer's return has been delayed. His injury, an elbow issue from the preseason, has been somewhat mysterious. Meyer was projected to be Miami's backup center and was even praised during camp as one of the team's most reliable linemen regardless of position. The Dolphins bolstered their depth inside by keeping Daniel Brunskill on the 53-man roster, but Meyer's eventual return will still be a big boost. Let's wrap this up by talking about the offensive line, because there are some important moving pieces here. Kean Smith has been in and out of the lineup as both a starter and reserve, while James Daniels remains on IR. In Week 4 against the Jets, Miami shifted Cole Strange to right guard, and honestly, he looked much better than either Kean Smith in Week 2 against New England or Daniel Brunskill in Week 3 against Buffalo. Strange showed enough in that primetime start to prove he can be a reliable option going forward. Now, when Andrew Meyer is healthy and eligible to return, Miami will need to make a roster decision. They won't carry 10 offensive linemen. That likely means someone will have to be cut, either Kean Smith or Daniel Brunskill. Tough call, but one the Dolphins will have to face. There is good news, though. James Daniels is progressing nicely from that pec injury suffered in Week 1. The expectation is that he'll be back as soon as Week 6 against the Chargers. That would be a major boost for this line. But here's the real X factor, Austin Jackson. He's also eligible to return in Week 6 from his toe injury, and his presence is absolutely vital. Quite frankly, the Dolphins have struggled badly at right tackle with Larry Borom filling in. If Jackson returns healthy and stays on the field, it completely changes the outlook for this offensive line. So while Daniel's return will strengthen the interior, it's Austin Jackson's return that could stabilize this entire unit. Week 6 could be a turning point for Miami's protection and the offense as a whole.